how to chair a great meeting. And we're going to emphasize great. And we're going to do a little bit of unpacking about what it means to have a great meeting. And yes, this does focus on the chairperson's role in the meeting, but we'll fold that the roles of every participant into the presentation every once in a while. And this principles and the practices in this presentation are not limited to board meetings. They can be applied to any type of team meeting. But we're going to look at what in the world does great mean.
Yeah. So great meetings accelerate traction. And I hope that will be the theme throughout this webinar, that's your takeaway. I love this quote by Patrick Lencioni from his book, The Advantage. No action, activity, or process is more central to a healthy organization than the meeting. And can I get an amen? Because I'm sure many of you have experienced that or resonate with this in so many ways. So with that, what makes for a great meeting? And I just wanted to get the poll up here and ask you the question, what makes for a great meeting? So thinking through as you answer that question, we can, as we're getting the responses here, clear purpose, yes. Those defined roles and responsibilities. Yeah, you're really resonating with that one. And I'd also say, how about a robust agenda? Guys, yep, we got 2 of you that voted for that. I'll just publish the results here if you guys can see that. So you really resonated with the defined roles and responsibilities and robust agenda. I'll refresh it.
And as you're participating in the poll, just to unpack a little bit more about the phrase, great meetings accelerate traction. If an organization doesn't have effective, fruitful meetings, they feel like interruptions. And an interruption definitely does not feel like you're gaining traction. Meetings, well structured, well organized, intentionally prepared for, help the organization and the team or the governing body, a board, actually move towards the strategic goals, the vision, the destination that has been agreed upon. So eventually meetings don't feel like interruptions. They feel like, I can't wait till we get together again, because it's going to help us move further in the direction we've agreed on.
Yeah, and I would also say, Joel, that what makes for a less than great meeting, right? We can talk about that. Conversely, like no decisions are being made, rabbit trails, getting into the weeds, and we always talk about when we're trying to move things forward, what can't be mentioned can't be managed. So this is why it's important to really identify what makes for a great meeting and what doesn't.
And do I feel listened to? Did my contribution get received? Was there an opportunity to make a contribution to the discussion, to influence the decision? Or was this just a time waster?
Good. Okay.
So a chairperson or any facilitator's responsibility includes preparing for the meeting. If you think about how an apple pie is made, I watched my mom. I've actually made a couple apple pies myself. But the paring knife, tiny little instrument, is intended to be used to cut away the things that are not essential for the pie, for whatever is going to be consumed. And that is true for meetings too. If you don't identify the specific outcomes for the meeting, it just can become whatever anybody wants to add to the mix. but a very small select set of outcomes is an act of preparation. Then what information do the members of the board or the team need in order to achieve those outcomes? So you've got the outcomes defined, the information is prepared, and are there people that need a little extra time to process? Mm-hmm. So you give certain temperaments and types of people a little more information ahead of time so that they can process it. Or here's the topics, and we'd like you to come with your set of questions around this line. This next point about execution, some people don't like to structure this as much, but I have found it to be helpful both as a board member and as an executive director, reporting to and participating in board meetings from that role. Some groups of people need something to respond to. So rather than the chair just saying, okay, we've made a decision on this, now what are the next steps? And there's dead air. Mm-hmm. So it's helpful for the chair, with input from board members or input from the executive director or CEO, to actually work out what are some ideas for execution, depending on the direction of the decision, that we could present so that board members have something to respond to. It mitigates the amount of dead air, and it stimulates thinking. It doesn't tell people what to think, but if you make some suggestions in that regard ahead of time, or you prepare the suggestions ahead of time, it can keep the meeting moving.
Yeah, give them that traction, right? And I think what you were saying, Joel, is so true about people, that there's a lot of people that they do a lot of internal processing. So they appreciate having that time and space to be able to think ahead of time, to prepare, to discuss, and provide their thoughts and opinions. So with that, we like to say that great meetings accelerate traction when there's an expectation of a time frame, of an expected time frame for each board member. So we like to say, generally speaking, 30 minutes preparation for a 60-minute meeting for board members, as well as a 30-minute follow-up for every 60-minute board meeting. So this really helps with those time commitments that many board members oftentimes who are trying to recruit new board members say that it's the time commitment a lot of times for people. So this gives them a really good rule of thumb of what's expected of them, and as far as committing to for each meeting to commit that time to. And it also helps and as far as like the chairperson themselves, that preparation time is a little bit more. We say there's a minimum of an hour prepping for every hour meeting and an hour follow-up. So again, this is just for the board meeting and in between, again, that work in between board meetings as well.
And we're aiming for a great meeting. You can have a good meeting or a mediocre meeting and not put in that amount of preparation time, but we're aiming for great. And the chairperson doesn't have to do his or her hour before, hour after alone. Two heads are better than one in many cases. So that's often time done collaboratively with the CEO or the executive director or the executive committee. It's just a way of saying that the chair role does to achieve great meetings. The chair probably needs to put in a little more time than the rest of the board members.
Right. So with that, we did our polling, and you guys said, wow, those roles and responsibilities are really important, and also clarity around the actual purpose of the meeting. So this is what we call is a sample of what we call our board agenda template. And I know it might look a little overwhelming, so I won't go through every section of this template, but basically it's really going to help you get that traction that we keep talking about. So elements of this template are, what are the outcomes desired? And that's really important. At the end of this meeting, what do we want the outcomes to look like? And the next section on this template is you can see is called this consent agenda. What is a consent agenda? It's really those documents that we get before every board meeting that we've got to review. For example, board meeting minutes. Maybe there's just a report from the executive director. It could be just information on a task force update. Or it could be just financial statements, regular financial statements that need to be reviewed. You can put it on the consent agenda so that the board members receive that board packet with all the documents, at least we say a week in advance prior to the board meeting, so that it gives them time to review those documents. And it's a big time saver. So when you get to the board meeting, you're ready just to approve the consent agenda. And if by any chance there's a document that a board member would like to discuss, then that can get taken off the consent agenda and placed on the actual agenda as an item or an issue to discuss. And as you can see, there's item numbers that are assigned for every issue or item, just as a reference point for board members to refer to. And then you can see there's a time range. And we say that better to have a time range because you can track that versus a time, the amount of time. It's harder to track it if we put 10 minutes. Well, I don't know when we started or when to stop. So this is really helpful to create that time range to keep things on point. And then every item, there's listed the issue that we're going to discuss. And then the chairperson being able to assign an owner. So this is a co-owner. So the chairperson is going to run this agenda, but there's going to be an owner to it. So this can really help the board chair to know the why, and this person can add the information that could be really important in discussing that particular item or issue. Also, there's a purpose section on this template. And these are just 5 of what you would assign to as purposes. You can think of more, but these are our 5 main purposes that you want to assign to each item so that each board member knows, why are we talking about this? What do I need to do with this issue or this item? And so the 5 are, if you can see the first one on the top here, the planning. So is this an item that we need to plan, like a meeting venue? Is this an item here where we need to problem solve? Maybe there's a task force conflict. Okay, that's a problem solving situation purpose that we need to discuss. The next one would be, maybe it's a contract negotiations where it's just information on, we got the different contracts and we need to just, for information only. And then we have the decision. Now we got to decide on a venue. And then the last one is evaluation. What do we need? Evaluating the budget versus the actual for March. So those are the purposes that we assign to each item or issue on the agenda. And we always like to say, put your decisions near the top so that if you run out of time, you can, those maybe less important items such as, information items can go to the bottom, and then you can table those for the next board meeting.
And what you put into the agenda might vary according to the purpose of the board. If it's a true policy board, you're going to have a different set of things in the issue and item category and the purpose category. But if you're a relatively young organization and the board is actually doing a lot of the operational work, some of those purposes may vary according to the actual function of the board.
Mm-hmm.
But governance is the ultimate function.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that has to do with what are governance types of outcomes. Governance mindset thinking is, the fiduciary responsibilities of representing the owners and the stakeholders rather than the personal interests of the board member. We like to cycle perspective on outcomes, because every meeting should have specific outcomes, and you're seeking input from the organization through the staff, from board members, from the stakeholders. And then it's listed on the agenda so that everybody can understand this meeting's outcomes are these things. Do we all understand that? Do you agree with them? If you don't agree, can you at least support the process of us pursuing these outcomes? Run the meeting. At the end of the meeting, ask for input on, did we achieve the outcomes? What lessons did we learn? What did we do well? What can we do differently? Integrate those learnings into the next time around, because every meeting builds on the meetings before it, and those outcomes can help you build momentum. Sometimes they're repeated, sometimes they're just one meeting's specific outcome. But again, integrating them into the flow and the rhythm of all the meetings helps build towards greater and greater meeting outcomes.
Yeah, and I think it helps mitigate getting into the weeds too, and staying at that governance level mindset.
And speaking of governance mindset, the chairperson has multiple roles. There is the official title, chairperson of the board. CGO stands for Chief Governance Officer. For great meetings to occur consistently, the chair needs to view themselves as having the handle on the governance aspects of the board's role and processes. But it also, the chair, also needs to be Chief Listening Officer. Everybody should be listening well to each other, but the chair is listening for all of the common threads and the points of disagreement or the points of confusion, and weaving them in and out and guiding the conversation, not controlling the conversation. Some chairs tend to do that. That's not going to get to a great meeting. Listening to help everybody hear each other, and listening so that then the third role, the chair can also be the Chief Summarizing Officer. We're about to take the vote. Here's what we've been hearing. Here's the ways to put it into the context in which the vote needs to occur. And the chair does some summarizing so that people recognize, oh, okay, now I'm really clear as to what we're actually making the decision on and how the decision is going to be made. Another chair role is that of managing the meetings process. And Mel will take us there.
Yeah. So the chair as a manager helps the board connect the dots. As you can see this image here on the left. That's really what the board chair is trying to do. Otherwise, we end up with just a rubber stamp functioning type of board. So we don't want that. So what we really want is the board chair to state the why, provide the context for the board members. And this is super important so that they know why is this on the agenda? Why are we talking about this? And why does this need the board's attention, and ensuring it stays at that governance level. It's also to seek the perspective of everyone on the board. And, people were asked to come on the board to provide their skill sets, to provide their experiences, and to provide their knowledge and their expertise. So it's super important for the board the board chair to seek that perspective, especially from those more silent voices, those that might internally process more, and also to help with shaping the environment. So what we mean by that is, providing that environment where it's psychologically safe for everyone to voice their opinions, their diverse thoughts, and experiences and backgrounds, and bring it all to share with the board about that particular item or issue. And what we mean by psychologically safe, it's Dr. Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety, where I feel that I can express my thoughts and opinions without fear of any kind of reprisal or being diminished or demeaned. So it's really important for that, chair to manage that, because we've seen in our work where we've had boards before where there's been bullies, believe it or not, on boards, where it's just been really sad to see that. So where there was no psychological safety for anyone to speak up. So the next thing is also the board chair manages and protects the pace of the meeting. It's what we call the practice of movement through motions. So start with I move, and then you get the second, and then you start the discussion. So that really helps move the agenda along, and it moves, and you gain that traction that we're talking about something, and we're going to make a decision, or we know what the next step is going to be. And next is relationships matter, and I think Joel, alluded to this already. Great governance occurs with great relationships amongst not only the board members, but also the board with the CEO or the executive director. So this is just really important to have those good relationships and to keep each other accountable, because in our experience, we've seen where maybe the board hasn't been a high functioning governance level board, and it's caused a lot of just nefarious things that have gone on with the CEO because they weren't held accountable. So that's really important to really create those really great relationships amongst the board members and the CEO. You want to add anything to that, Joel?
You can think of relationships as the lubrication for all the gears that when the board does its work of governing, the different tools and structures and processes are the gears, but it's the relationships that lubricate all of those gears working together, because nothing gets done in a group outside the context of relationships. Are they healthy and edifying relationships, or are they toxic? And I don't want to be a part of this kind of scenario relationship.
Yeah, especially Joel, especially when you think, Joel, about how so many of these, these boards, it's a voluntary position. They're volunteering their time to a mission that's important to them.
And then, speaking of the gears and so forth, we're mixing metaphors like crazy here, even a musical metaphor. But for a meeting to be effective and great, it's really helpful to identify the different roles. The agenda has timeframes in it. It's helpful to have a person assigned to the role of timekeeper who can help the board chair think about, okay, we've spent this much time, of the time allotted. So they actually just point out, we've got 5 minutes left on this discussion. And then the focus role, there are some people who like focusing on the forest. There are other people who like focusing on the trees. Well, maybe there's somebody who's got a sense for the blend of the two, and they can say, hey, let's back up and look at the forest for a moment. Okay, now let's look at the trees for a while, not the roots, not the branches, not the leaves. That's the staff's job. But just that rhythm of bigger focus, zoom in focus to make the discussion richer and invite different perspectives in. People come in with their own wiring, their own temperaments, their own geniuses, their own experiences, their own lenses. So discover what they are within the different members of the board and call on them, lean into them and say, hey, we need your perspective on this, because from what we know of you and the things you've said in the past, I think we really want you to speak up on this. And then there's other people who have a sense for, okay, we wandered off. We need to bring it back. So let's be clear about what we're really discussing and what we really want to decide. And then what kind of decision are we making? We're going to get to that a little more specifically in another couple slides. The chair can't alone create a great meeting, but the chair is here's another mixing of the metaphors. If the chair can be viewed as the conductor of the orchestra, there are rhythms to an orchestral piece, there are rhythms to a meeting, and the conductor calls on different parts of the orchestra at different times to get the fullness and the richness to come through. And the chair needs other people with different expertise, different roles to help that happen well. Excuse me. We can move on to the next slide.
Okay. I'm going to pull up another poll here.
Well, it's happening. One of the roles that doesn't get officially stated very often is the comic relief role. Not sarcasm comics, but somebody who just got a gift for knowing when to break the tension or lighten the mood. The chair can give them permission to, use your discretion, but help us remember not to take ourselves too seriously. The things we need to discuss may be serious, but we don't need to take ourselves too seriously.
Yeah. So what voice has been most difficult to manage in a meeting? So I see the axe grinder voice. I'm seeing people vote for that one. The troublemaker voice, I see that one. While you're voting, one that we see sometimes with our clients is the talkative one, the one that might be doing a lot of talking. So what do you do about that as a chairperson? How do you manage the overly talkative one? One of the ways in which we say for that, as you're voting, I can talk about that. We often might suggest prepping questions ahead of time to keep, I know we mentioned that before, that might be helpful for that overly talkative one to stay in that lane, not go outside of that, get into the weeds go into the weeds and continue to talk about things and bunny trails and etc. So this can be super helpful. And also maybe to give time limits. That's another way to manage that. Or politely interrupting and saying, let's get everyone's voices heard before we continue. And then we can circle back around to them if there's time.
I would add that for me anyway, there's a possible common theme between axe grinder and troublemaker. Mm-hmm. Something's really important to those people, and maybe they have not felt heard up to this point, or the solutions in the past just didn't meet their expectations or their desires. If it's a one-time occurrence, it might be appropriate in the meeting to say, can you tell us why this is so important to you in that way? Mm-hmm. I recognize the intensity. Help us to understand what led you to this. Respectful questions, let them feel heard, ask them if they feel understood. If it's a pattern that has kept recurring throughout several meetings, then I would suggest that the chair and possibly somebody else with the right temperament and gifting actually get together with that person and say, this pattern keeps showing up. We value your voice, we value the things you have to say, but it's the way that you're saying it that is causing other people to not want to participate in the conversation, or whatever the reality is. So sometimes it can be addressed in the moment of the meeting just by saying, let's create some space to find out why this is so important. Other times it's a preparation thing. This is now becoming an interruption in this way. So let's find some common ground and figure out how to help you find a different way to bring to our attention the things that are important to you. And Mel and I were talking about this whole list a while back, and we said we tend to think of these as completely and only negative things. Mm-hmm. Somewhere in each person's behavior is a grain of truth or something that ought to be heard and leveraged into a contribution to the process. But it rarely becomes a contribution to the process if it's only viewed through the negative impact that this behavior is making. So look for the grain of truth and the thing to be leveraged that could be helpful.
Yeah, and I think it's also important that this is where you can remind them of the board expectations. A lot of our clients have a list of some ethics or board expectations that when they are onboarded, they agree to. So that's something that can also be referenced or reminded as you're chairing a board meeting. And there's also behavioral norms that Joel will talk about as well.
Which is another way of framing what Mel was saying about expectations. And the center term there, healthy accountability, the behavioral norms, expectations of acceptable behavior, unacceptable behavior, has to do with being very clear about the expectations and then clear about how we're going to hold ourselves and each other to those expectations. And in light of time that we have left for the full webinar here, we'll just let you sit with that when you receive the copy of the slides. It's just important to name them. The boards have normalized behavior. It's important to name them and agree. Oh yeah, that's a good one. That one's helpful. Or well, let's stop that one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't experience it before, but heard the story of a board member whose favorite adjective began with the letter F. And nobody called out how uncomfortable that made them when that word kept appearing.
Yeah, and this is some what we say, be consistent with some of the ground rules if there's any. We won't go through all of this list. Like I said, you'll get this in PDF format after this webinar. But it's really important this could be just a useful tool to help mitigate some of those voices that might be challenging during the meeting. And so establishing those ground rules, and like I had mentioned, taking some of these and maybe including them in your board member expectations document, or creating board member norms, co-creating those with the board members so everyone has a shared understanding of what's required of them as they behave with one another in the board meetings. So this is just a list of some sample things that you can include in that. Also, it can also be important to ensure that you get that agreement, either by signing a document or getting a verbal yes as you're chairing that meeting, of reminding them of what our norms are and what we've agreed to. Another way, another useful tool to help keep everybody in that abiding by those ground rules and those norms is through what we call Robert's Rules of Order. And this can be a really important tool that depending on the size of your board, if you have a larger board, you can use the full Robert's Rules of Order, or if you have a smaller board, you can do the Robert's Rules of Order Light is what we call it. So it's just a way in which it helps all voices be heard. And it, gives you those rules and structures for the meeting process, whereas it provides the boundaries and it helps increase the credibility of decisions and outcomes because we abided by these rules and to ensure that all the voices were heard. And it really does protect the weak from the strong. It protects those bullies that can sometimes overtake the meeting and help mitigate that. And it also aids in better board meeting minutes. So when the secretary of the board that's typically taking the board meeting minutes, there's structure in place for them to take really good board meeting minutes and track all of the motions and the decisions that were made.
Speaking of motions, this next slide is an illustration of how a motion works. We're not going to unpack the details of it due to time, but it's helpful to provide for board members a diagram explaining how a motion flows. The green is a motion without any kind of amendment suggested, but if an amendment is suggested, that's the yellow line. And so the symbols, the flow chart can be very, very helpful, and it helps with that movement through motion principle, where there really should be no discussion at a board meeting without a motion being on the table. Because if there is no motion on the table, the discussion basically by default has permission to wander all over the place. But a true motion on the table gives the chair something to bring people back to. This will be in the slide deck that you received. We don't need to unpack the details of it right now, so we can move on to another approach.
Yeah, so as a board chair, it's, to accelerate the traction in the board meeting, we really want to mine for conflict. And I know this is uncomfortable for a lot of people, to really lean into that uncomfortable place of conflict, but it really can give you traction in your meeting, because we don't want board members to come to a board meeting and just listen to information and, sort of become that low functioning rubber stamp board. It really is the waste of time when you've got so much, knowledge and skill sets and talent there that you really want to utilize that as a board chair. So you really want to get into that habit of, ensuring that you're creating this environment where there's healthy disagreements and it becomes normal to have diverse opinions, and you really can get to a better decision by creating that environment on the board and to mine for that conflict. Again, I talked about that psychological safety as a board chair, really ensuring that there's psychological safety within the ethos of the board members, so that they can express their differing opinions if they have in their differing thoughts and perspectives. And because if everyone's agreeing to every item, what's the point of the meeting? So you really want to really accelerate your board and get them into that higher level of thinking and that robust discussions through mining for conflict.
We've been saying meetings build on each other, and minutes are part of that building on each other. They're also, we can skip that particular slide for the time being.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Minutes are not just a record of the decisions made and the actions that are going to be taken, but the first bullet point, they're actually legal discoverable documents. So you do want to pay very close attention to what's actually in the minutes, the decisions and the actions to be taken. You don't need a lot of this person said that, this was what was discussed, maybe enough for context so that the decisions and actions recorded make sense for the people who were not actually at the meeting. But they don't have to be long, they just have to be clear, and you have to think about, will this make sense to somebody who was not actually at the meeting? And will it represent the board's decisions and intent if it becomes a discoverable document? There's also the taxonomy bullet point there has to do with creating a log of the motions. It's a separate document from the minutes, but if you can codify them, moved, seconded, carried, or sometimes passed MCP on a date, and the last number there, 121, it's the 121th motion made in that calendar year. That way you can create a separate log, so you don't have to hunt through all the minutes to see what decisions were actually made.
Oftentimes we get, Joel, in board meetings, we hear board members say, I thought we made that decision. I thought, or we didn't make that decision. So it's really great to be able to have a quick way to retrieve your log of motions to get that clarity.
All right, we've run a little bit over our designated or announced time, and if people are dropping off, understandably, they'll still get the email. if anybody wants to continue on here, we'll finish the last couple of slides.
Yeah, I think we got 2 more here where, and just follow up, the importance of follow up. The chair sets the example and models the way that we're going to hold people accountable. We like to use the phrase, who's got the monkey, on each agenda item or issue. And a great tool to use is the RACI chart. We call it RACI, who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be consulted, and who needs to be informed. And just having those tracking mechanisms that there's consistent follow through.
And boards, like any other group, do some routine work. It's helpful to have an actual documented calendar of this occurs at this time of year, this has to occur at that time of year, and you can build it into the rhythm so that it shows up on specific agendas at specific times, and you know it's not going to fall through the cracks. Some of those things are just how to do the meetings well, how to make sure we're paying attention to the right things, but some of them are actually externally mandated expectations by state agencies or county agencies. You know, the 990 forms that need to be annually updated, the expectation mandated from an outside agency about conflict of interest forms that need to be signed by every board member at every year. So that way you've got the built-in calendar for those things. And then the ad hoc occasional things, or the unique outside the normal rhythm things, can be added to an already existing agenda. Things don't fall through the cracks. And that kind of systematic approach to the process helps build momentum. One great meeting could be a standout meeting, but you want a series of great meetings that continues to build momentum in the right direction.
Yeah, and Joel, we have a really great client that does this so well with their annual calendar. And so they just model that so well so that nothing does fall through the cracks, because they understand their responsibility that they hold as board members with this organization that they work for in advancing the mission.
Well, thank you all for joining us, and feel free, if you've got any follow-up questions, to contact Mel or I. So I thought there was a slide that showed our email addresses, but that
I'll bring it up. Mm-hmm.
You'll receive that. And frankly, we enjoy helping boards, individuals on boards, whatever their role is, and teams of any type get better and better at the work that they do together. So we'd be glad to have more conversations with you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.